A single screw. That is all it took. One tiny adjustment on a carburetor that General Motors sold as boring, everyday equipment, and suddenly, ordinary family sedans were destroying muscle cars at stoplights across America. General Motors never told anyone about this. They never advertised it. They buried it under talk of fuel economy and smooth driving. But the street racers figured it out, and when they did, everything changed. This is the story of the Rochester Quadrajet, a carburetor so misunderstood that mechanics called it junk. So underrated that hot rodders ignored it for years, and so secretly powerful that it fed over 100 million General Motors engines for a quarter century. The company built it to save gas. What they actually created was a weapon hiding in plain sight. Before the Quadrajet existed, Rochester Products Division was just another General Motors parts factory. The company started way back in 1908 as an electrical parts maker in upstate New York. General Motors bought them in 1929 and put them to work building starters and ignition systems. By the late 1940s, they moved into carburetors. Their first designs were simple and reliable, nothing special, but the engineers in Rochester had bigger ideas. During the 1950s, Detroit entered the horsepower wars. Every car company wanted more power, more speed, more bragging rights, and carburetors had a problem. If you made them small, they gave great gas mileage but choked the engine at high speed. If you made them big, they delivered massive power but wasted fuel and ran rough at low speed. Nobody could solve this puzzle until Rochester built something completely different, something that broke all the rules, and that something would change street racing forever. The year was 1965. Chevrolet had just released their brand new 396 cubic inch big block engine. It was a monster designed to dominate the competition. But sitting on top of that engine was something nobody expected. A strange-looking 4-barrel carburetor with an unusual split personality. Rochester called it the Quadrajet. The name came from its 4 barrels, but this was no ordinary 4-barrel design. Look at it from above, and you immediately notice something weird. The 2 front barrels are tiny, barely over 1 inch across, but the 2 rear barrels are massive, more than 2 inches wide. It looked unbalanced, almost like a mistake. Engineers at other companies laughed at it. They called it ugly and strange, but Rochester knew exactly what they were doing. Those small front barrels handled everyday driving, cruising to work, sitting in traffic, running errands. They delivered clean, precise fuel mixtures that saved gas and kept the engine happy. The driver would never even know the big barrels existed during normal use. Then everything changed when you stomped the gas pedal. Those giant rear barrels did not open based on how far you pushed the throttle. Instead, they responded to the engine itself. A special AIR valve inside the carburetor sensed how much air the engine actually needed. When demand increased, that valve slowly swung open. As it opened, it pulled fuel rods out of their jets, sending more and more gasoline into the engine. The harder you pushed, the more it gave. The system regulated itself automatically. A small engine might never fully open those secondaries, but a big block at full throttle could pull over 750 cubic feet of air per minute through that same carburetor. One design, infinite flexibility, and a secret nobody understood yet. GM had a problem they did not want anyone to know about. By the early 1960s, insurance companies were raising rates on fast cars. Government regulators were asking questions about emissions and safety, and inside the corporation, different divisions were fighting over who controlled performance. Chevrolet wanted to protect their image as the muscle car king. They did not want some carburetor from Rochester stealing their thunder. So GM made a decision. They would sell the Quadrajet as an economy carburetor. Nothing exciting, just a fuel saver for everyday vehicles. The marketing talked about smooth driving and better gas mileage. Performance was never mentioned. The Quadrajet appeared on everything from grocery getter sedans to grandma wagons. It looked completely innocent. But out on the streets, something strange started happening. Heavy Buicks with big 455 engines were pulling away from lighter muscle cars. Full-size Oldsmobiles were beating Camaros off the line. Pontiacs that should have been slow were running faster than anyone expected, and every single one of them had the same carburetor sitting on top. Word spread through the tuning shops. From Detroit to California, mechanics started asking questions. What was different about these cars? Why were they so fast? When they finally opened up the Quadrajets and looked inside, they found the answer GM never advertised. The secondary air valve had a tension screw. From the factory, Rochester set that spring deliberately tight. This made the big secondaries open gently and slowly, perfect for smooth family car driving. But loosen that screw just a quarter turn and everything transformed. Those massive secondary barrels snapped open faster, airflow surged, and engines that felt lazy suddenly woke up with shocking violence. The secret was out. The hot rod community went to work. Tuners across the country started experimenting with the Quadrajet in ways Rochester never intended. They discovered that the air valve tension was just the beginning. Behind that simple adjustment screw sat an entire system waiting to be unlocked. The vacuum brake diaphragm controlled how fast the secondaries could respond. Some racers drilled out the tiny orifice inside to speed things up. Others disconnected the dampening linkage completely. The results were dramatic. Carburetors that once felt sluggish now delivered instant throttle response. They found brass enrichment tubes hiding above the secondary air doors. These small tubes squirted extra fuel the moment the big barrels started opening. When those tubes fell out from vibration, the carburetor would stumble and hesitate. But when they worked properly, the transition from primary to secondary felt seamless. Metering rods and hangers became the next frontier. The tapered rods controlled exactly how much fuel flowed at different throttle positions. Swap in rods with different taper profiles and you could tune the mixture across the entire power band. A $10 assortment of rods and hangers could wake up an engine better than expensive bolt-on parts. The knowledge spread through racing pits and garage workshops. Experienced tuners started rebuilding junked Quadrajets and selling them to racers who wanted the hidden power. What cost almost nothing at a swap meet could outperform carburetors worth 10 times as much. But not everyone understood. Mechanics who never learned the air valve system blamed the carburetor when engines stumbled. They called it quadrabog. They called it quadrajunk. The insult stuck for decades. Meanwhile, the tuners who actually understood the design were winning races every weekend. Same carburetor, completely different results. Knowledge made all the difference. By the early 1970s, the Quadrajet had spread across the entire General Motors lineup. Chevrolet trucks carried them, Cadillac luxury cars used them. Buick, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac bolted them onto everything from economy models to their hottest performance machines. Over 100 million would eventually roll off the assembly line. Each division made the carburetor their own. Chevrolet used a side-mounted fuel inlet that angled 90 degrees to fit around their engine layouts. Buick and Pontiac preferred a straight inlet pointing forward. Same internal design, but different external packaging. This created confusion at swap meets for decades. Carburetors from one division would not always bolt directly onto engines from another without modification. Buick pushed the design further in 1971. Their massive 455 cubic inch engines needed more airflow than the original Quadrajet could deliver. So Rochester enlarged the primary venturers slightly. The result was an 800 cubic feet per minute carburetor that could feed serious horsepower while still delivering smooth daily driving. Pontiac created their own special version the same year. Their 455 high-output engines received Quadrajets without the outer booster rings in the primaries. This increased airflow but sacrificed some throttle response. Only 4 part numbers ever used this rare configuration. Finding one today is like discovering buried treasure. The production numbers were staggering. At peak manufacturing, Rochester built around 15,000 Quadrajets every single day. Demand was so high that General Motors contracted Carter Carburetor to build additional units under license. Carter produced millions of Quadrajets from 1966 through 1979. The parts between Rochester and Carter versions interchange perfectly. Both worked identically despite coming from different factories. The 1980s brought computers into the engine bay. General Motors knew carburetors were living on borrowed time, but instead of abandoning the Quadrajet, they evolved it. In 1980, Rochester introduced the electronic version. A computer-controlled solenoid now adjusted the fuel mixture based on feedback from an oxygen sensor in the exhaust. The mechanical design stayed the same, but now a computer brain made constant adjustments to meet tightening emissions standards. This kept the Quadrojet alive for another full decade. The final automotive application came in 1990 on the Oldsmobile 307 engine. After 25 years and over 100 million units, the last Quadrajet finally rolled off the line. An entire era of carburation ended quietly, but the story did not stop there. Edelbrock acquired the rights to produce new Quadrajets for the performance market. Rebuilders like Cliff Ruggles built careers around restoring and modifying these carburetors. His book on Quadrajet tuning became the definitive guide for enthusiasts. And when Holley released their Sniper electronic fuel injection system, they designed a version specifically to bolt onto Quadrajet intake manifolds. Even in the modern era, the spread bore concept lives on. In racing, the Quadrajet proved everything the critics got wrong. Stock and super stock classes still require them today. Properly tuned cars run deep into the 9-second zone on the same basic design General Motors called an economy carburetor back in 1965. The engineers at Rochester built something they never fully understood. They wanted fuel economy. What they created was a hidden weapon that rewarded anyone willing to learn its secrets. One screw, one spring, a few minutes of work, and quiet cruisers became absolute monsters. General Motors wanted economy. The streets got something else entirely.